appointment in the army after I had finished training. You have been selected for the position of personal assistant to the military attaché Karachi, Pakistan, my commanding officer said, and I could feel the frisson as this news sunk in. I was a very nervous 20-year-old with little experience of the working world outside the army, who boarded RMS Cilicia on the 28th of June 1958 in Liverpool for the 6,000-mile journey to Karachi via Aden and Port Said. Some 2 weeks later, on the 13th of July 1958, we moved into Karachi harbour to tie up alongside one of the many berths for large ships. And I hope that you can see this slide, which is a very old slide of Karachi harbour. A young man came on board and introduced himself as a colleague with whom I'd be sharing an office. We drove through the chaotic streets of Karachi to the house at 28 PECHS on the Drigg Road, which was where I was to live with 3 other bachelor colleagues who worked in the UK High Commission. Having lived with my parents in India for 3 years in the mid to late 1940s, my new life came as no real surprise to me. My father had served in Landi Kotal and Abbotabad. In both places, there were no other English children of my age. So my playmates were the children of my parents' staff. Where we lived on the extremities of the built-up area of the Drigg Road, returning to Karachi in 2014, the first time for 56 years, I asked the taxi driver as we left the airport where the Drigg Road was. And to my utter amazement, he said, "We're on it." When he confirmed this, I was amazed to see that the whole of the Drigg Road had been built up on both sides, whereas in my day, it was sheer desert running from 28 PECHS all the way to the airport. Perhaps this is hardly surprising, since I've discovered subsequently that the population of Karachi has increased by nearly 18 million in the intervening years. So what are my memories of Karachi in those days? One could roam the streets freely with only light traffic. And here we have a picture, I think, of Elphinstone Street, which is called something else now. Thank you. And I've been trying to find out what that building, that old building, the colonial building on the right-hand side as you look at the picture is, because I remember that distinctly. And it's also interesting looking at this picture, where you'll see the cars parked neatly on the side of the road, very little traffic elsewhere. And I have to say that the majority of those cars are American and not British. The bazaars were open to walk amongst freely, and you could use the trams without being jostled, so you could get from A to B without any problems at all. The city was heavily policed, and so there was very little reported crime. The city was kept clean and tidy, and some streets were even washed overnight. Being the capital and seat of government at that time, there was a large and vibrant international community, which mixed freely and frequently, and I made friends easily with Pakistanis outside work. The beaches of Karachi were a popular destination at weekends. I particularly remember Bellagio Beach, where the High Commission had a beach hut which could be hired. And I also remember Paradise Point, where to see turtles later in the year was not uncommon. About once a month, we would make for Speedbird House, the home of the British Overseas Airways Corporation Hotel, located in Karachi Airport. This is all... Slide, please. This is, of course, a very, very old picture of Karachi Airport. And as I've been back on subsequent occasions, I've tried to imagine Karachi Airport as it was in those days with what it is now. Totally impossible to make a comparison, really. It was here, from Karachi Airport, that I took my first flight ever as the diplomatic courier from Karachi to Delhi. I have to admit that I was scared stiff as the plane plummeted in free fall every time we hit an air pocket over the Thar Desert. By this time, a fledgling PIA had begun to operate from Karachi, flying mainly Dakotas, but also, I think, Lockheed Constellations. And I think it was the Constellation that ploughed between Karachi via other stops on its way to London. I think it stopped at Cairo as well. Down and outs were a common sight on the streets in my early days. A harrowing sight was to see a dedicated vehicle scouring the streets early in the mornings to clear bodies of people who had died. Also, to see children who had been deliberately disfigured and left on the street with a begging bowl was always very upsetting. I'm very pleased to see that this kind of thing no longer happens, as long gone in your country. Although I'm keen on most sport, my main love has always been cricket. It all started when I was tutored in my early days in India. My Indian tutor did not teach me much maths, but did turn me into a more than useful cricketer. When I got bored with lessons, which I must admit occurred frequently, he was always up for a game of cricket. My return to Pakistan later in life enabled me to indulge my love for the game. I remember attending an initiative to bring the game to the wider areas of Pakistan population. This was held at the then infant National Stadium, and here I have a picture of the stadium. And I think it's interesting to note that in those days, no pavilions, only cover overhead were the awnings. And you can see that in those days, it was built to be a national stadium, which it has surely become. It was at this stadium that I watched the diminutive Hanif Mohammed score 100. And as matches were invariably played on jute matting wickets, Faisal Mahmood, that very famous Pakistan cricket, bowling his lead cutters, and this is the ball that hits and goes towards the leg, was invariably unplayable. Since those early days, I went on to play a handful of first-class matches, including against the 1974 Pakistan touring team to England. Thank you. This team included a number of notable Pakistan cricketers. The team was captained by the great Majid Khan from the Khan family, as you will all know. And it included such players as Wasim Bari, Majid I've already mentioned, the captain was Intikhab Alam, Safraz Nawaz got me out in both innings, of which I'm not ashamed, and Zahir Abbas basically took us to the cleaners. As opposing captains, I had the privilege of playing against the great Imran on 4 occasions, when he captained Oxford University. Only once, I must admit, with some modest success. He was a great cricketer and leader on the cricket field. I also, in 2015, hosted a tour of England by the Pakistan over 50s veterans cricket team. And I've been very privileged to accompany Peter Oborne on 3 of his previous tours to Pakistan as the team umpire. I have traveled widely in Pakistan, mostly in the Hindu Kush and the Karakoram regions, where I have trekked extensively and mountaineered at a basic level. In the spring of 1959, together with my girlfriend, we made a trip in her Morris Minor over the border from Karachi into Afghanistan. And you'll see from this slide the route that we took. And it is via Hyderabad, Larkana, Sukur, Jacobabad, Sibi, Quetta via the Bolan Pass to Shaman, and over the Afghan border towards Kandahar. This was my first naive foray into the unknown. At Sukur, I was confronted by a couple of irate policemen for taking a picture of the barrage. Somehow, I managed to convince them that I was an innocent tourist and got away with it by the skin of my teeth. It was a tricky moment. Then, on the road beyond Jacobabad, 4 armed tribesmen suddenly appeared while we were having a picnic. They looked a disreputable bunch and were armed. And I don't mind admitting that I was worried as they just stood around quite close to us in the background. My instinct told me not to offer them money, but instead to invite them to join us to have something to eat and drink. This they did, and we indulged ourselves on bread and cheese and a cup of chai, and I'm very pleased to say that after about half an hour or so, we shook hands and we bade farewell to each other with a salam alaikum, and any potential crisis was done away with. Traversing the first dramatic gorge of the Bolan Pass, which went for about some 10 miles alongside the single gauge railway, my thoughts conjured up British soldiers passing through the same area in 1839 to fight the first Afghan war. Now, our trip came to a sudden and unexpected end when we were stopped by the Afghan police just over the border and told to return to Karachi without delay, to discover subsequently when we got back that we shouldn't have been there because we didn't have the necessary authority. So we were lucky really to get away with it. So much for the background. Now the real nub of what I've come to talk to you about. Parliamentary government in Pakistan was, as you all well know, ended by a military coup d'etat on the 7th of October 1958. And here we have the Dawn headlines from that time. In the beginning, it seemed to be little more than a minor revolution. Major General Iskander Mirza assumed power as the president and appointed General Mohammed Ayub Khan Chief Martial Law Administrator. Leading to this moment, it had become apparent that there were rumblings of dissatisfaction with the government and particularly from within the army. Politicians, according to those with rank and influence in the army, were self-centered and greedy and for what they could get out of the country without regard. The coup was executed without the usual clandestine meetings or countrywide movement of troops that you would expect to precede a coup. There was very little preparation. It was handled like a military operation. And according to Ayub's memoirs, and I quote, "The people were completely fed up with politicians and desperately wanted a change," unquote. And they had great respect for the army. On assuming his new appointment, General Ayub had all the forces under his command, which made him to hold a very powerful position. He had told the nation that the only alternative to martial law was chaos and collapse. After no more than a few days, the martial law authorities had detained many political leaders and those renowned for smuggling and other anti-social activities. The diplomatic world was generally impressed by the rapidity and efficiency of the way the coup was implemented. I was woken by a persistent loud knocking on my door. The culprit turned out to be my colleague with whom I worked in the military attaché's office. With some urgency in his voice, he explained that there had been a further development in the takeover by the army and that we had to wear uniform to work in the morning. And it was in the early hours of Monday, the 28th of October 1958, when I found my crumpled uniform and set to with an iron to knock into some sort of shape. Apparently, the political situation had been thrown into potential chaos when, during the evening of the 27th of October, Iskander Mirza was summarily dismissed by a cabal of generals, including Burki, who went to the presidential palace on instructions from Ayub, who was a far stronger man in all respects, to tell Mirza he had to quit. Mirza apparently made no attempt to hang on. Asked where he wanted to go, he said London. But since there were no flights at that time to London, he went off to Quetta before leaving shortly to go to London, where, as you probably know, he subsequently died. The news that Mirza had been overthrown and total power assumed by Ayub Khan was conveyed to the ambassadors on the 27th at the Prime Minister's house, by which time it had been surrounded by the army. On our journey to work the following morning, that is the 28th of October, there was little overt sign of what had happened overnight. Yes, there were a few more army patrols in the area. Slide, please. And here you will see a slide of an army patrol, obviously, with some soldiers in the back of a truck. But considering the enormity of what had happened, it seemed all fairly normal. This was surely testament to the meticulous planning which had preceded the takeover. At the High Commission, where we had never before seen armed soldiers, there was a single soldier on both the entrance and exit, and a machine gun positioned at the top of the steps leading to the front door. But that was all. These soldiers really never had anything to do, because time passed and there was no military action taken. Throughout that day, we were busy reporting the goings-on back to London. But it did not come as any particular surprise, because actually in the Defence Attaché's office, we had anticipated what was going to happen. Rid of Mirza, Ayub quickly promoted himself to Field Marshal, declared himself president, and set in train immediate martial law regulations. To ensure against any backlash, I recall that the two brigades already stationed in Karachi were reinforced by an additional brigade located not far outside the capital city. Ayub's immediate martial law regulations were aimed largely at anti-social activities such as black marketeering, smuggling, and hoarding. Offending officials paid the price for corruption, misconduct, and inefficiency. He was particularly harsh on wayward politicians and inefficient military officers. Dead wood was ruthlessly cleared. Ayub also quickly turned his attention to land reform and economic development, although I do not remember much of this, as it's 60 years ago since all the papers passed across my desk. What I do recall clearly is that the imposition of martial law was done without any civil disobedience or bloodshed. It was as though the population was generally supportive of the coup, and it would not be an exaggeration to say that Ayub was seen as some sort of savior. For its part, the army kept a low profile, and it wasn't long before we were able to report back to London that the army had largely resumed its normal activities. Ayub's position was further legitimized, if indeed it was needed, by a statement from Miss Fatima Jinnah, the revered sister of the Quaid-e-Azam, published in Dawn on the 29th of October, 1958, which read, and I quote, maybe it hasn't there. The exit of Major General Iskander Mirza from the political scene has brought a general sense of relief to the people of Pakistan. A new era has begun under General Ayub Khan, and the armed forces have undertaken to root out the administrative malaise and antisocial practices to create a sense of confidence and stability, and eventually to bring the country back to a state of normality. I hope and pray that God may give them wisdom and strength to achieve their objective, unquote. The British military attaché at the implementation of martial law was Brigadier Alistair Tuck, a cavalry officer who had been at Sandhurst, the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst, at the same time as General Ayub. This gave Alistair Tuck an advantage over the other members of the diplomatic corps. As some of you will know, Ayub had a strong military background. He was the son of a Rizaldar major, an Indian Army rank, and he served in Hodgen's Horse. From Aligarh College, Ayub took and passed the entrance exam and was selected to study at Sandhurst. Ayub did well at Sandhurst and passed out 60th in the Order of Merit and first among overseas students. After a successful period attached to the Royal Fusiliers, Ayub joined the 1st 14th Punjab Regiment and served with them for many years. I remember a day in early 1959 when the telephone rang in my office. It was the President's secretary. Would you ask Brigadier Tuck to come to the Presidential Palace as General Ayub wants to see him? And of course, I passed this message on to the Brigadier, who left really without knowing what to expect. And I remember getting a rocket from him saying, well, why didn't you find out what he wanted to talk to me about? Well, it's not the sort of question you ask of the President's secretary. The Brigadier returned, and I was surprised to learn that President wanted to know if Britain would allow an instructor from Sandhurst, the Royal Military Academy, to train the Pakistan boxing team for the 1960 Asian Games. Having himself won the heavyweight championship at Sandhurst, Ayub considered the British Army Physical Training Corps could best provide what would be needed by Pakistan to prevail over India. The War Office replied, having received the request, that they would be perfectly willing to help, but that Pakistan would have to pay the expenses. You can understand that the brigadier was incandescent with rage to receive this, knowing that he would have to go back to tell the president that yes, he could have his instructor, but that Pakistan would have to pay. So he sent another telegram off, and unfortunately, the decision remained, so Alistair Tuck had to go to Ayub to tell him the news. And apparently, Ayub replied, saying he felt sure that the Americans would oblige, and of course they did. And perhaps this was the moment for the catalyst for Pakistan in future seeking aid from the United States rather than Britain. Now, I've not tried to analyze the political ramifications or the long-term effects arising from the imposition of martial law. That discussion is for another time, particularly as my time in Pakistan came to an end in October 1959, about 16 months after I had arrived, when I was sent home to attend officer selection. That said, it was clear to us all that General Mohammed Ayub Khan was well liked and respected by the British government of the time. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, I hope that I've been able to convey my genuine affection for your country, and particularly for its people, for whom I have a very high regard. In its short life, your country has made great strides and continues to cement its place in the world. To my mind, it is such a shame that you have been bedeviled by the huge number of refugees that have flooded over your western borders, and that you have suffered profoundly from the problems of extremism. The potential of Pakistan is enormous, and its location strategically important. Inshallah, your president, Imran Khan, can deliver on his vision of rooting out corruption, providing swift justice, reviving the economy, and supporting the supremacy of the law. Time will tell. Thank you.
Now we want to invite Ghazi Salahuddin Sahab and Shershah Syed Sahab to follow a conversation.
Well, thank you very much, Colonel. One part of your presentation, it began with nostalgia. It crossed the imposition of martial law, and it ended with hopes that you have present. Let me tell you, it was very interesting in the sense you showed that picture of Alfred State, we called Elfie on those days.
Elfie.
Elfie. And the building that you showed is still there, but it is not the building, it's only the facade. And I remember in my reporting days in Dawn in the 60s, I wrote about it, that it's a building without a soul, being sort of, it's some kind of a
facade.
Metaphor.
Yes.
Yes. And also, things have changed so drastically, as you noted, but you can't fly to Delhi from Karachi now.
You can't?
Which you did, yes, you can't.
Is this because of the potential animosity?
Animosity. No, not that kind of relationship with India. Also, so interesting, we are sitting in the premises within the precincts of the President House. This is where Ayub was. Yes.
I had no idea.
Yes, so it's a very interesting coincidence that you were talking about him, and as you said that the political aspects of that is for some other time. We talk about your life in Karachi during those days. So Mr. Shershah Syed is a medical doctor,
Right.
and also a writer, and also we were together in a panel yesterday, which was about Karachi in the 50s and 60s. So there is a certain overlapping of the thing, or perhaps an extension of that discourse. So,
Well, I hope that I haven't said anything which contradicts the more informed people who addressed you yesterday. I am but a simple soldier, so I see it through very narrow eyes in a way. But what I told you today is really the memories that I have of that time. But I'm perfectly prepared to, if you do have any questions, to have a go at answering them.
I'm just wondering, you said about the Paradise Point and the other beach.
Bellagio.
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 I'm not familiar with. Is anyone?
Anybody know?
Does anyone know what is
Bellagio?
Bellagio?
Bellagio.
Okay.
It's all in the pronunciation.
Yes.
All right, okay. Yeah. And
The Paradise Point has that
Yes.
rock.
I remember it. I remember.
with the
I
hole.
remember it
That's
well.
gone
It
now.
has been breached.
Oh, has been breached.
Huh?
No,
No. Beach.
Oh.
Beach.
No,
beach.
you're
It may
talking
be
about-
something like the French beach we have now. Yes.
French beach.
But Halaji is something different.
We don't want to dwell on this, but my memory is an enormous expand of land,
Yes.
beach, with beach huts at the back.
Yes.
One of which was
Hawke's
owned by
Bay-
the
Hawke's Bay was-
British High
was one.
Commission.
Yes. Hawke's Bay was one beach
Yes.
that.
Yes, I
if
remember
you
that.
One aspect that we talked about yesterday.
I'm just talking about this beach. Those days we have a very small road, Maripur Road.
Yes.
From here, it's not very far from here actually. So from Maripur Road, you have to go to the Sandspit. Then the Paradise Point will come there.
Indeed. I mean, I do remember on the journey from the centre of Karachi, we lived, as you know, out on the Drig Road. But sometimes I would go from work on a Friday and spend the weekend on the beach. And I remember distinctly passing the deprived areas. And these were probably fishermen
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah.
who had set up some sort of encampment there, which was really the only naked view of poverty that you would get in Karachi in those days.
So on Maripur Road, you have Lyari, then Gulbai. These are the very underprivileged area, bad, So you must be passing through. Do you remember anything about the schools and colleges in Karachi those days?
Well, of course, being a young man, I was very interested in the senior students at the time. But my contact, no, we didn't go into schools to talk. The only time I had any contact was through cricket. And I remember going out, as I said, to the International Stadium, the new stadium in Karachi, where there were dozens, hundreds of school children. And I remember going onto the pitch and helping with a little bit of coaching, but that's all.
Yesterday we were talking about the sense of freedom that we had in the 50s and 60s, with some emphasis that in Sadr there used to be bars.
Yes.
And then there used to be dances and cabarets. What memory do you have of that kind of social life in which? Yeah.
Well, I've got to be very careful because my wife, my partner, is here in the audience.
Oh,
But what I can tell you, which is quite.
Give us some juicy pieces about others, not about yourself.
No, well, you mustn't attach this story to any particular person.
Yes.
But I used to go for a run most evenings in my pair of military boots. And I used to leave 28 PECHS and cross the road and go out towards the countryside. And I started noticing a young lady who was sitting on her balcony most days when I passed. And of course, being a very friendly person, this individual waved and eventually got a wave back. And that wave developed into throwing of messages over the wall, which were duly collected. And he was lucky enough to set up a meeting at one of the cinemas. And there were 2 or 3 really big cinemas in Karachi at the time. So I met this young lady in the cinema, and we held hands in the back row, and I thought this was all very nice. And she said goodbye, and she said, "You mustn't come outside with me." So off she went and got into her chaperone car, went back home. All was well until a couple of nights later, when the bearer that we had came in ashen-faced, white and trembling. And he said, Pathan Chowkidar wants to see you. So I went out into the kitchen, and there was this enormous Pathan with bandoliers, cross bandoliers of ammunition, carrying his gun and a big knife here. And he said, "You no see lady, otherwise..." So that was the end of a very, well, potentially nice
Good.
liaison.
Yes. Good you mentioned the cinemas. Yesterday, I reminded people who in 60s the population was much less than what we have,
Yes.
of course. And in those days, there were 100 cinemas in Karachi. You may have 100. And you may have been familiar more with those showing foreign films.
Yes.
Rex, Palace,
Paradise.
Capitol.
Paradise rings a bell with me.
Yes, Capitol.
Yes.
And would you go to movies on a regular basis?
Yes, well, it was one of those forms of entertainment. I mean, in those days we had no videos, no DVDs, none of the modern technology. So our entertainment was a pie black box gramophone, and we were able to get music from the UK. So it was always a great occasion when the diplomatic, when we got a notification of a parcel to go and collect. So we had diplomatic privileges. And so that was essentially our entertainment, except that we did go to the cinema very regularly to see those films that we were either made in English or dubbed. So yes.
Any questions from audience? If somebody wants.
But before that, did you know that Lawrence of Arabia had been in Karachi?
I didn't know that, but what is very interesting is that Lawrence, we now live on the south coast of England, close to Bovington, where he lost his life. There's an effigy in the local church, and where his funeral took place, and his grave is a place that we visit very often. But no, I had no idea he'd been in Karachi.
When he was
he in the Air Force in those days?
He was in the Air Force with another name, and he stayed in a barrack on Drigg Road.
Oh, right.
And then,
right.
Yes.
And he used to visit the old Karachi and Tata, and he wrote about it
Yes.
also. So
Yes, madam.
Yeah, there's one question from there. Yes. Oh, sorry.
Khan, I'd like to ask about General Ayub. Was there an impression that he was power hungry, or he actually had ambitions for the country, which he thought he was fit to lead?
Well, thank you for that question. I mean, it goes right to the root of the background, I think. Our impression in the High Commission, from a military aspect, was that no, he was not power hungry, certainly to begin with. Whether that was subsequently true, I'm not sure. But to begin with, I think his motives were entirely for the good of the country.
My question is to you that Luckily, 2 days back, I was talking to my son, who is sitting beside me, and I was telling him that Ayub was the only ruler that he had given an immense progression to Pakistan. I wasn't born in his regime, but I had read a lot about him. So I was very excited when I was knowing about this session. I want to know that was I correct in telling my son that General Ayub had given a very positive image to Pakistan? And what is the change between a democratic government and the so-called dictator government? Because I think that Pakistan always receive a positive image whenever the people, they call that this is a dictatorship. My question is this, that can you please enlighten the role of Ayub Khan in giving an immense progression to Pakistan?
I wonder if you would want to go into that, but please.
Well, I'll give a very brief answer because it's a very complex question that you ask. But certainly our impression at the time, as I've already said to the lady in the front row, was that Ayub's motives were absolutely honourable. He was not out for himself initially. Whether that was subsequently true, I'm not sure. And what is the difference? Well, I think the army, based on its, if you like, its history, its antecedents with the British Army, I would hope the values of the Pakistan Army, certainly then, and I think it's true from what I know now, are very well founded. And I think people at the time of troubled minds and so on are looking for stability. They're looking for somebody that they can trust. Now, whether the population of Pakistan always trusts the army, I'm not sure, but it certainly did in those days. I mean, does that help?
But let's leave it at that, because he was only for the first year of that rule, and
I mean, initially, if you see, like he quoted Mohtarama Fatma Jina, even she acknowledged him, and she thought that he is going to do some good things. And we see that in next election, she was the candidate against Ayub Khan. So, I mean, things change according to the...
That's I think, slightly beyond the
today's
prescribed territory of this. Yes.
My question, sir. Sir, you were at that time, and the intellect of Pakistan was in Karachi. Transferring the capital of Pakistan was to Islamabad, and because I think that Karachi should have remained the capital of Pakistan because intellect was there, and transferring the capital was the misery that disintegrated Pakistan later on in 1971. So do you think that this concept that the intellect of Pakistan is still here in Karachi?
That is an almost impossible question for me to answer, but what I can say is this. I think that Muhammad Ayub Khan always had it in his mind that he needed to be close to army headquarters for very understandable reasons.
Yes.
Karachi is out on a limb strategically as far as the army is concerned. So he very quickly moved to be closer to Rawalpindi, where the army headquarters was based and still is, I believe. And then it was an apple of his eye that he was going to move the seat of government up. And he created, or it was his idea, certainly, to create Islamabad. And so was it a good move from his point of view? Yes. As to whether or not, I mean, commercially, Karachi has always been the seat of power. Whether it has been politically is not a question I can answer.
Well, let's come back to the Karachi where you spent your time in those days.
Hi, I also had a question specifically about the Ayub era and how it's perceived and remembered. I suppose, like, to some people, Ayub's era is remembered as very, like, modernizing, progressive in a lot of ways, but to a lot of other people, I mean, in the first years of independent Pakistan's Karachi, like, a lot of Karachi was very, like, cross-class, cross ethnicity, whereas a lot of people remember Ayub's era as the breaking of those cross-class neighborhoods, cross-ethnicity neighborhoods, the separation of governing elites from, the people they govern over, the removal of, the moving of the capital, the moving of the universities, the separation of the protesters from the governing powers. I mean, those are contrasting in a way and contradictory in a lot of ways as well. I suppose I'm wondering what your take is on that, as well as the others as well, on how that era is remembered.
Again, a very difficult question for me to answer based on my limited knowledge, really, but I take your point entirely. And I think that there must have been in the back of his mind the fact that if he were removed from these problems, that they would lessen. Whether they ever did or not, I'm not sure. Over time, we know that there have been problems, but that, with an emerging country, and don't forget at that time that you had West Pakistan and East Pakistan. This was an enormous problem, and it was entirely due to, dare I say it, to the British administrators that created this situation, which was untenable. And it was certainly untenable as far as the army was concerned. So to try and answer your question, I'm not sure, but I feel sure that there must have been something in the back of Ayub's mind, that if he were to move away, perhaps the problems would lessen, but I'm not sure.
Any other question? May I ask a question?
Of course.
Yes. While you were here, did you go to any education? Education institution, but libraries? Were you aware of Theosophical Society library, or how freely could you move and go to the old parts of the city?
I remember we had a Pakistan, I think it was called the UK-Pakistan Social and Intellectual Society. I forget exactly what its title was, but I certainly remember going to a number of functions. And I think these functions were probably hosted by the British Council. And of course, the British Council had an extensive library. So as far as we were concerned, and of course within the High Commission itself, there was an extensive library where we could always get books on the background to Partition and all of that kind of thing. And if we wanted lighter reading material, then we would probably go to the British Council.
And any memory of visiting a bookshop?
Well, my interest, I'm a book collector now. I collect signed books. And unfortunately, I never managed to get Ayub's signature on his memoirs. But, don't forget that I was a very naive, young 20-year-old. So in those days, my interest in historical and political matters was very shallow.
Don't say shallow.
I had other interests.
Yes, that's it. That's more like it. Oh yes.
Sorry?
Okay. No. He's saying what I said, that Ayub was here in this house.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Any more question? Would you like to sum it up, this experience and coming back here at this time?
Coming to Pakistan is always a joy. The trip that we did with the Wounded Tigers last time took us up to the northwest frontier, where we played cricket at the Shandur Pass, the highest polo ground in the world. It's a memory that I shall never forget, because as soon as we got there at altitude, the players were saying, "I can't breathe. I find it very difficult to get my breath," where we were at 14,000 feet or something like that. The opposition, which is always better than us, we got beaten yesterday. In the times that we've toured Pakistan, we've only won one game out of, and in fact, the opposition at Sargoza University let us win, I think. They were feeling sorry for us. But otherwise, we're always on the receiving end. But that's not the object of the exercise. The object of the exercise is to try and lift the image of Pakistan in cricketing terms, so that you will soon be able to welcome other national teams back to Pakistan rather than playing your internationals in Dubai, which is a tragedy.
Yeah.
But again, down to stupid extremism, terrorism, but it's always the innocent that suffer. So my impressions are always very positive. Thank you very much indeed for inviting me to talk today, and I look forward to going around and spending a bit of money on a few books. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.